Thank you, Dave, for sharing your expertise. I just want to remind everyone to share the conversation here at #MissionCloud. As our panelists get situated on stage, I believe they're being mic'd. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. With us today is Stan Kaczmarczyk, Director, Cloud Computing Services, Federal Acquisition Service, Information Technology Services at the General Services Administration. We're also joined this morning by Maria Roat, Chief Technology Officer for the Department of Transportation, Tony Summerlin, Senior Strategic Advisor, Federal Communications Commission, and Wolf Tombe, Chief Technology Officer, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. They will be led this morning by Frank Conkle, our Technology and Events Editor at NextGov.
Good to see you.
You guys all set? All right, Frank, it's all yours.
Good to see you.
How's it going, guys?
Hey, all right, how you doing?
Good. Welcome. I'm Frank Conkle, Events Editor and Tech Reporter for NextGov and GovExec Media Group. You already heard our panelists here. I just want to say that we'll start with Stan here and just introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit about what you do before we get started with the content portion.
Sure.
Start at the edge.
I can do that. Is my mic on? Or?
Yeah, you sound good.
Okay. Sorry to get here at the last minute, but I blame the Metro for it. It's always convenient to blame the Metro, right? They were late. I wasn't late, the Metro was late. I'm Stan Kaczmarczyk. I'm the Director of the Cloud Computing Services PMO Project Management Office at GSA. And my office was stood up quite a few years ago after Vivek Kundra came into office and implemented the cloud first policy. My office was stood up specifically to stand up acquisition vehicles to help federal agencies move to the cloud. And we have a couple of blanket purchase agreements in place now. We got a couple of things that we're considering new contracts for, and basically our mission is not just to sell our contracts, but to help federal agencies move to the cloud, even if that's using their own contracts or using NASA soup or something like that. So we're all about the mission. We're all about making agencies move to the cloud. And if we can do that with our own contracts, that's fine. If not, then that's fine too. So that's our mission of our office.
Mine works.
Does mine work? Is it on?
I
think
It's a little loud, I think. There you go.
Louder?
It's really loud.
All right. Good morning. My name is Maria Roat. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the Department of Transportation. I've been there almost a year now. One of my charges, I guess my charge coming in the door at Transportation, was to take an enterprise approach to the department. Just look at it across the board. There previously wasn't a CTO, so there's about a 4-year gap. So starting with a clean slate, really taking an enterprise approach, not only looking at cloud, what we're doing around cloud, what we're doing around technology, getting our arms around data. On my team, I now have a Chief Data Officer, a Chief Geospatial Officer, just recently hired a full-time enterprise architect. I'm also responsible for Section 508 in the department. So along with all of that, working on cloud, trying to get my arms around what all the program offices and each of the agencies, just across the department, what they're doing. So really taking an enterprise look at technologies and where we're headed and where we're moving as a department.
All right, thank you. I'm Tony Summerlin. I have the privilege of working at FCC with Dr. Bray and a lot of great people. After 30 years, I took the plunge and became a government employee. It's a very interesting excursion. I think the FCC has been interesting from the standpoint that I came most recently. I spent a long time at OMB with the first, even though we renamed things, but Mark Foreman, and then with Karen Evans, and then for a very brief period of time with Vivek Kundra, my choice. And then went to the intelligence community, and luckily ended up at the FCC which is a very intriguing place. Only 1,700 employees, as David pointed out, and I think it gave us the opportunity to do the first real lift and shift and cloud movement all in one stroke over a short period of time. So it's really exciting stuff, and it's tremendous.
Hi everyone, I'm Wolf Tombe. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So I've been with CBP 15 years now, so that's a pretty good tenure. And my role is primarily to set the strategic technical direction for the agency, which, as you can imagine, evolves every year. Our current real push is towards mobility, embracing open source wherever we can, and a lot of that is intended to get us into the cloud as quickly as possible. So it's a fun journey.
And since everyone's talking about themselves, I like long walks on the beach, short romantic walks to the refrigerator, and moderating panels. So there we go. I will start out with a really big softball question, but it will get the conversation started. Just to preface a little bit, with the Obama administration's budget forecast is around $7.5 billion next year in provision services like cloud computing. It's a lot of money. It's almost 10% of the IT budget, which is approximately 80 to 86 billion or so. So I want to see where you guys think the cloud landscape is right now. This will give you a chance to talk a little bit about what's going on in your organizations, but perhaps, and maybe Stan, you can kick us off a little bit on what you see outside of government, or outside of, GSA, but outside the rest of government.
Sure. Am I on?
Where's the microphone?
There's been.
You got the dud mic. We always do that to people just to see.
So, again, I go back to the contracts that we put in place to try to get agencies to move to the cloud, the 2 BPAs, and there's been a lot of flack about, well, the contracts haven't really sold as much as they're supposed to sell, right? But actually, the infrastructure as a service BPA, which is the first BPA we put in place to help agencies move the low-hanging fruit to the cloud, which is like storage and virtual machines and website hosting. That was a 5-year BPA. It's expiring in October. I'm trying desperately to extend it for 6 months or whatever. It had a $76 million estimated value, right? So that BPA was put in place with the provision that if you're a vendor on the BPA, you couldn't even bid for business unless you had a GSA authority to operate in place. That was like prior to the FedRAMP whole thing, right? So we subsequently modded the BPA to say that you can have the GSA ATO or you can have FedRAMP, right? But at the time we did it, and it took a full year for vendors, to get up to speed and get ATOs in place. So basically a 5-year ATO was basically a 4-year ATO. So out of $76 million over an estimated 5 years, we've sold about, I don't know, $55 million. So we, basically, if you do the math, right, we're on track. The emails as a service BPA is the next one we put in place because that was seen as low-hanging fruit. Emails like commodity service, and agencies will be comfortable moving email to the cloud. That's a 5-year BPA, which is about halfway through its life, and it's got about $2.5 billion estimated value. We're nowhere near getting near that, right? So I think that there's going to be a lot of traction in the federal government for moving to the cloud in 16, 17, 18. I think we've caught a lot of, we got a lot of criticism for not getting there faster, but we did everything we could to get there faster. But we have a budget process and the FAR and regulations, and things don't happen as quickly as you would like it. But I really do think that as far as we go into 16 and 17 and 18, we're going to get a lot of traction with agencies moving to the cloud.
Well, 17, Tony, that's what you guys are planning to be pretty much entirely in the cloud.
Absolutely.
FCC, talk a little bit about that.
Well, we had to move our equipment out of our kit, out of our building. We have 3 data centers. We do not manage the financial data center, which is managed by the financial operations group, but the other 2 data centers are being moved, and they're going to West Virginia, which the Hill evidently doesn't like West Virginia anymore, but that's where they're going, and we think West Virginia is fine. And that actually creates distance, as I've found out many times, does not make the heart grow fonder, and it creates a certain separation, so we're capable of actually putting people in place to start rewriting our apps into true cloud infrastructure. And we're doing it very, very quickly, and we're just picking, I don't know what low-hanging fruit looks like. We tried that during the Bush administration. We never found anything that was low-hanging except for payroll, which was very painful, and I think I got my car shot at. But it was, it's all hard, and certainly GSA tries very hard. We worked very hard to write FedRAMP, which was supposed to facilitate the move to the cloud, and instead now it's being seen as a barrier. But those things happen, as Stan said. It's complicated, and our esteemed 700 lawyers in the FCC don't agree with GSA's interpretation of the FAR. They don't agree with the infrastructure as a service contract. They don't agree with the SaaS contract. So it's an evolving trend, and we're going to do it. I mean, I don't know what the rest of government's going to do, but we're definitely just doing it and going forward. But certainly the complications of dealing with GSA and whatever contracts are there, I would hope that GSA would just make everybody do everything, but it's just not happening, just like email. And we did email first, and that's really hard too. But it's all hard, and it's all worth it, and I think the saving money routine is probably, as Tony Scott said, cloud may save you money, it may save you a lot of purchases, but the main thing about it is it's fast. So once you get there, it's fast. But being hooked to legacy systems with tails on them that are about 20 years old, it appears, 25 years old, is just, it's not sustainable. For a bank, it's sustainable. For the government, it isn't. So we just have to do it.
Takeaways, lawyers are bad. It's hard. Do it anyway. Maria, go ahead. Landscape, where you're at.
The landscape, wow. So looking across transportation, you know, I'm trying to take that big picture view of what's going on across the department. And it's interesting because it's not just, you know, moving to the cloud. It's, you know, cloud is an enabler. People have already moved. We've got a footprint in quite a few, you know, service providers out there. And not only is it, you know, standardizing what we're doing, how we're managing, how we're monitoring that, it's paying attention to who's moving to the cloud, who issued a services contract with a cloud footprint behind it that we didn't see, that contracts didn't catch, that, oh, by the way, all of a sudden 250 servers are moving to the cloud. We didn't know about it. It wasn't in the investment. It wasn't part of the governance. It wasn't documented anywhere. Oh, by the way, they're moving. And part of that challenge is I'm also looking at the big picture on data center consolidation, much like you guys are closing data centers. Looking at the big picture on data center consolidation, guess what? All of a sudden I've got 250 servers, whole pile of racks moving out of a data center. What does that do to the data center footprint? And how can I plan in the long term for that data center, you know, looking out over the next couple, 3 years, if from a bigger picture I'm not having visibility into those investments, what people are looking at, where they're headed, you know, so all of these things tie together. So as we're trying to do that data center consolidation, yet there's contracts that we haven't seen where people are actually moving out to the cloud. So trying to get our arms around that. And one of the things that I'm really trying to work towards, you know, I don't need to own and you know, nitpick everything to death, but I think it's transparency in what's going on across the department is really going to help in the long run. And I think part of what's driving that transparency to see what people are doing as they're moving to the cloud is getting our arms around data. We completed a data inventory, understanding where that data is, how it's moving, and oh, by the way, what's going on with that data. So part of having our arms around that data piece of it also informs that transparency in what's going on with the rest of the environment as people are moving to the cloud.
Yeah. The man in the cowboy boots.
Yeah, so for CBP, we've been looking at cloud in a number of different forms for several years now. We actually did move our first foray into cloud-based services, was our email platform. We wanted to get off of our legacy self-hosted Exchange servers and move to email as a service. We did that successfully 4 years ago now at least. The one caution I put out there is that when you talk about cloud, make sure that you're using the same language as your vendors. So this was billed as a cloud-based service. We went into an agreement, signed on the dotted line. About a quarter of the way through the migration of close to 49,000 users, we had an outage, and the service went down. And so we got on the phone to our cloud provider, and it's like, okay, what's going on? What happened? And they did a root cause analysis. They got it back online pretty quickly. It was only down for a few hours, but you know, in the life of an average person who relies on email to know whether a good guy is a good guy or a bad guy, that can be the difference between life and death. And so I love the title list, where cloud meets mission, because that's really what it's about, mission. The people who are, for us, carrying guns and trying to protect the border, trying to process cargo to keep the economy strong, and how do we support them? So we'd moved email, we had this outage, the RCA came back, and it turned out that a blade had failed somewhere in their email server farm. And so we started asking some really directed questions. How is it conceivable that a failure of a blade could bring down your cloud? How do you define cloud? How is it architected? How is it set up? What are your automation controls? What are your elasticity capabilities? So for us, it was really critical lesson to learn. And the vendor, by the way, now is offering truly more cloud, a real cloud service. But at the time, cloud was still fairly new, still evolving. So we've learned to put in standard definitions into all of our contracts now for cloud that reference NIST special publication 800-145 and its predecessor document on realization of cloud capabilities, NIST special publication 800-146. And that's how we define cloud now. And we make sure that our vendors acknowledge that their cloud meets all of those criteria and capabilities. If they miss any one of them, if they cannot be elastic, they're not accessible by broadband internet connection capability, all those things, if they miss any one of them, they are not determined to be an actual cloud, and they're disqualified from competition. So I think, you know, saying that you're moving to cloud and that you're going to cloud is great. Understand what cloud means for you. Make it a definition that you and your vendor agree to, so you're always talking the same lingo. Turned out the first foray we had, it was a managed service. It was not a cloud service. It's now a true cloud service. And you know, things are running pretty well. And users are getting really quick performance. There's never an outage of it, unless we have a network problem on our side. So things are actually swimmingly along, and it's, you know, relatively inexpensive. And we'd like to see that cost go down as more and more, you know, people join that service, and it gets more and more broad kind of spectrum support, because there is economy of scale. But so my cautionary note is, you know, when you're talking cloud, make sure you know what you're talking about, have a definition.
Were you guys able to tweak your strategy right away when that happened?
Yep.
And
yeah.
Have you been able to share it? Like, do people come to you ever and say, hey, how did you do this? Or how has it evolved in the future?
Yeah, so if another federal agency wants anything we've done, we will share it with them. That's not a problem. In fact, anything that my shop has done, so I run the technology directorate in CBP, and anything that we've done, any of our architectures, any of our plans, any of our methodologies, I'll share it with any federal agency. I'll also share it with any state and local agency. And I've gotten permission to do that. So my opinion is the taxpayers paid for it once, and people who have ever heard me speak, I say this in every speech, if the taxpayers paid for it once, they should never have to pay for it again. And I don't care if it's a federal taxpayer, a state taxpayer or a city taxpayer. They shouldn't have to pay for it again. So I think we have an obligation to share those things amongst government.
So we'll just kind of touch on some challenges that they ran into at Customs. I'd like to, with what Mr. Summerlin's doing, the FCC, the lift and shift now, what are some of the challenges that you guys have run into? I know it's not just about physically moving servers and stuff, but you have to rewrite all your applications for the cloud, right? So it's not like it just fits in perfectly with this 20-year-old stuff that you had before, right?
Right. Well, the first problem is justifying the money to start it. The second is getting the fingers of the 20-year provider off of the equipment. The third challenge is finding someone good enough to do the inventory properly so you know what you actually have. Most people think they know what their inventory is on all their kit out there, but I would bet a house that you really don't. I mean, it's unbelievable the things we found. I think we took down 15% of our servers that we're paying for software on that nobody was using. I mean, it's an extraordinary exercise. So having a great partner to making sure that you know what you have is the first part, and then you can start working on your modernization plan, which you break down the apps into the most critical apps that you need to do today. I always like to do the hard ones and the most important ones first rather than doing the small ones, because the small ones don't matter, and there's a reason they're small, and there's a reason I don't care about them. So I just go for the big ones first. And when I had my own software companies, I always wanted to go into companies and do the hardest thing first, not an easy proof of concept. So it's biting off a lot, and you have to get teams that are used to delivering on a very agile basis, and a very overused word. But I would venture to say, when the presentation before, which was very good about Gartner, but you know, Gartner said that the 90s were going to become the paperless era. So look carefully at 17, 18, and 19, and let's see what happens there. But the predictors are just that, and often don't come true. So you just do it one step at a time. The modernization platforms, you can choose whatever you want, but we've chosen very carefully just to make sure the platforms will be going forward. And I think the other part is, I mean, I think a lot of our management thought cloud meant that a 747 would pull up at DCA and we'd load the servers, and that would be the end of it. So there are a lot of issues, as you say, is what's really cloud. You know, they say, well, where am I going to put my server in the cloud so I can run my software? And I'm like, you just said 3 things that aren't relevant to the conversation.
I imagine that's a tedious conversation to have over and over again.
It is, and having it with the Hill is exceptionally wonderful experience.
Well, explain why you have to do that. Just because you're an independent agency, right? But you have
Yes, and we have an oversight, and I'm sure someone must have had a problem with it, but we're very agile on the budget, and we got money allocated to us for our lift and shift, for the lift, not the shift. We're all praying for that part. But the oversight committee, that's why I mentioned West Virginia. Ever since Senator Byrd died, I guess no one's really holding up the flag there, Rockefeller or anyone. But so they wanted to know why I was going to West Virginia, and then when we described what we were doing, they said, well, what do you mean, where are these mirrors, and what's going to be in the mirrors? And this was their IT specialist. So we've had to justify every nickel 9 times in 3 months, going up there explaining why West Virginia, why we're doing it, why we're spending $6 million or whatever dollars to move our equipment anywhere. And we luckily had the advantage of FCC because it was in a really low-graded real estate area, and now GSA decided it was, don't mean to pick on GSA, but now we're in a really high-priced area because they're doing development, so they're moving us out. So I had an impetus, because in a year we have to move out of the building. But the other warning I would give on all this is that when you do cost comparisons, there is no apples to apples comparison. When they said, what do you mean cost per square foot? We don't pay anything here. It's like, no, it really does cost you something. Power? What are you talking about? It comes with the building. So when you start breaking down all the costs of a data center and then the data center being moved to a cloud environment and dropping off the servers, there are costs associated with it. And to tell them, I need to spend $20 million to save you $5 million a year for the rest of your life, they've kind of heard that before. I mean, at OMB, I warned several people to stop saying they saved $4 billion because, and then finally GAO helped me out and they did a study and said they couldn't find any of it. But saving money is a very tenuous angle. The reason you're going to cloud is because it's efficient, it's flexible, it's resilient, it allows you to do things you can't otherwise do, and most of all, it's very fast. You're not going to cloud because, and I refuse to tell them I'm going to save you hundreds of millions of dollars because we're going to a cloud environment. That's just not it. But luckily the FCC had open internet or net neutrality, or whichever flavor you like it called, which upset everyone, so we get everybody jumping on us, so we had a little more impetus.
One other thing you said, and I'll get to Maria in a second, but you said that just doing an inventory of what you had allowed you to get rid of 15% of your servers. Mm-hmm. So what were they doing? Just running?
Just running. Well, it's not anyone's fault, but the fact of the matter is if you have someone there that gets paid to maintain servers, and if you have somebody that has ODCs that they get paid money for to buy stuff, you're going to have a lot of stuff. I mean, you just end up with a lot of stuff. And
it's like a Hoarders episode, but for IT or something.
Yeah, it's the appetite continues, and it's like money never cured greed. You know, a server never needed to defeat the next technology. So, but we've got no one's trying to do something wrong. It's just 20 years of hanging out, certainly having what did David say, 9 CIOs in 8 years. That was hugely beneficial to the organization. I'm positive of that.
Why did you take that job? Man, that's like terrible job security, man.
Nobody goes up.
Yeah, it's a tough thing. I'm sure everyone's got the same thing. I mean, CBP, I did a technology review, and they had 70 some odd technologies they'd never deployed, but the Hill kept giving them to them. And I worked on the border, so I'm sitting there going, can you just give me a gun and a car? You know, so you have that appetite that is just unstoppable.
Maria, you mentioned governance as a challenge, and I think you said something about there were cloud solutions that were, or cloud contracts that were awarded or something that not everyone was even aware of. So can you talk a little bit about that, like the governance?
I have those too, by the way.
Yeah, so coming into transportation, I probably was in a little bit of a unique position because being on FedRAMP, I had the insight from what was reported up on then the portfolio stats, now the IDC, what was going up to OMB. So I knew what transportation was doing around that. And on the flip side, I had, on the other hand, working with all the cloud providers very closely, them telling me, oh, by the way, this is what else is going on at the Department of Transportation. So when I came on board, I asked the folks that are doing, all the governance and managing the investments, I said, print me out what's going on for FY 15, 16, and 17 around cloud. I said, I want to know what the spend is for this year and the next 2 years. Interesting report, not a lot of money reported on it, not entirely accurate, and fast forward probably about 5 months after I was on board, somebody calls me and said, hey, so-and-so just issued a contract. And oh, by the way, it's to a cloud provider. Really? Pull up the little sheet, guess what? 0, 0, 0 for this year and the next 2 years on cloud spend. And I went, where did that come from? So it turns out that, as the contracts are issued, we've got a lot of work that we need to do around the investment and the governance process, because contracting, as the contract was issued, the SOW and all of that went through the process in the RFP, contract did not catch that it was a services contract, and behind that service was a cloud. They didn't catch it, and they didn't understand it. So part of what we've been working on is trying to, in working very closely with the acquisition community and contract, to understand and say, you know what, as these are moving through, we need to be able to flag those and understand it. That governance piece and being able to do the longer, I'm trying to look out over the next 3 years and what's, you know, where things are moving, because, you know, not only is it data center, it's the investments, how things are changing, what the technology, and as we're moving to common platforms around geospatial and some of the things we're doing around data and building out some hybrid cloud solutions, as we're moving into that, I need that insight into some of the investment dollars. I think FedRAMP will, or FITARA is going to help on that visibility, but it's going to take some time around that. But the governance, you know, from the transportation perspective, we still got some work to do.
Right.
And even though there's an investment review board, you know, I'm trying to look out, and if there's $0 on cloud spend for a particular mode in the department that says 0, 0, 0, and then you tell me you issued a contract, where'd that come from? I mean, that happened yesterday. I was on a call yesterday. One of the agencies is moving 250 servers, as I mentioned earlier, to the cloud. I didn't see that on the spend anywhere. I'm like, where did this come from? So I'm not going to say stop and don't do anything, but I'm working with the program office on that and saying how we can do this and bringing in the CISO and other folks that need to be in on that.
Slightly unnerving, right? I mean, considering the headlines lately, which had not been the most pleasant with IT and security and government. I mean,
Yeah.
to not even know. And then piggybacking on top, I mean, you at least want like a FedRAMP certified, like something that's been through FedRAMP. But if
And oh, by the way, the ISSO for that particular program, they don't have one. They left and went to another agency, so they've got a big hole there. They've got a big hole around discovery because they think it's about 250 servers. And I said, well, is it only in this one particular data center? And they said, well, we're not sure. I said, well, what's the connectivity back to 2 of the main data centers that we have for headquarters? Well, we don't know that yet either. So, you know, being able to look at some of this stuff in the long term, the governance and the investments and knowing what's coming helps in some of the devils in the details pieces.
Program managers gone wild. That's my reality TV pitch. Okay. Stan, what have you seen in terms of challenges and lessons from your vantage point at GSA?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting hearing Maria talk about her challenges in her job, because, you know, what we find, I mean, one of our main challenges in working with agencies to, you know, try to promote cloud is like, who are we talking to? So we're talking to the acquisition people, we're talking to the IT people, we're talking to the CIO people, and in a lot of big agencies like Maria's and Wolf's, you know, you have multiple bureaus and divisions, and they all have CIOs, right? So we're working now on an engagement with a very big agency, right? The biggest agency you can think of, but we're working with a particular bureau in that agency, and they can't speak for, you know, what the rest of the departments are going to do, right? And services are going to do, but they can encourage. So there's definitely, you know, there's no centralization of the CIO and IT function. It's fragmented by bureau and by department, and it makes it really hard for somebody like Maria or Wolf, you know, who's working at the enterprise level to try to figure out, you know, how to get this thing going. So that's an issue. And the other issue is, like I said, you know, the acquisition piece of it, right? So, you know, in my world, you know, we'll deal with the CIO staff, and, you know, oh yeah, great, you know, we're going to move to the cloud, we're going to use the contract, blah blah blah, and then it goes to the acquisition area, right? And the contracting officer is like, well, no, we don't want to use GSA, or we can't, you know, we're not comfortable with this and this and that. So there's a big disconnect there. So there's a lot of fragmentation in the way things are managed in the federal government, and it's a challenge, and it's a challenge that we're trying to overcome. But you know, it's a structural thing.
I want to talk a little bit about comparisons and strategy, just in hybrid versus private versus public cloud and open and proprietary systems. We've heard a lot about that. Wolf, you have kind of a unique de facto approach that I don't think I've heard of anyone else using, but talk a little bit about that, which you're looking at open before you look at anything else, right?
Well, so that's something that I'm trying to propose right now, which is that in terms of we want to save money and we want to move more quickly and be more aligned with where industry is going, we really should, and this is still a work in progress, we really should look at, is there an open solution, an open source solution for this problem first. Then if there's not, look at what are the proprietary solutions. Now, why do I do that? One, I think it's the right thing to do for the mission from a cost perspective. It's definitely where industry has gone, so there's a lot of good precedent throughout industry worldwide on making the move. I think in some ways it's far more secure. So all the emphasis on the cyber sprints now and all the issues, thanks to a certain agency that I'm not going to mention, but I think everybody's read about them with a hack. Everybody in the federal government, all CIOs, are heads down trying to make sure that their systems are secure, that our networks are secure, and that all the apps are secure. Well, guess what? When it comes to a proprietary technology, I can't tell for sure that technology is secure or not. Why? Because I can't look inside it. I have to go to the vendor and say, can you tell me if it's secure, please? And of course, the vendor says, of course it's secure. It is absolutely airtight. And don't forget to patch every Thursday. So it's like, yeah, that makes me feel really warm and comfortable. With open, I can look at it. I can do an analysis of the code. I can see that, wait a minute, there's a backdoor right there. Remove that code. I can do that. So I think there's just a lot of value, a lot of benefit in looking at open. I think it's definitely something we want to look at when we move to the cloud. I don't want to be in a situation where I've moved, some of my applications, and let's face it, I have terabytes and terabytes and terabytes of data. I have some apps that they've been modernized. One is 44 years old now, still running. It's been through 2 full modernization. It's in its 3rd modernization effort now. I move that thing to a cloud. I don't want to find that I'm locked into one vendor. And that now that I've done all my transition work and my architecture work and my security work to move it into that cloud, that I'm now stuck. Because you know what? I become a hostage at that point. So I want to make sure that things are open, that they're more transparent. I don't want the data necessarily publicly open. I want to make sure that's secured and locked down, but I want visibility into that cloud infrastructure. I want to be able to see with my own 2 eyes, what's happening, how's it's running, how's the security on it. I want to be able to probe it, inspect it, and know that for a fact. I don't want to have to tell Congress, well, vendor XYZ told me it was secure.
Not a good conversation.
Not a good conversation, not a good position to be in. So I think there are just multiple really good reasons to do this. I think now is the time. The world's moving that way. I think David's conversations on where the world is going are absolutely on target and brilliant. And we need to have that conversation in IT. More importantly, in my opinion, we need to have it with our mission partners. So when was the last time you went out and actually talked to your mission leadership about things like cloud and open? Because you know what? I'll guarantee you that as many vendor calls as IT is getting, the mission representatives are getting the same vendors reaching out to them. And they're hearing this stuff. Oh, move to cloud. It's going to be wonderful. It's instantaneous. There's no hassles. And 20 minutes later, you're saving 70% of your IT spend. It's great. Well, you know what? Yeah, you could try to do that. I can tell you what's going to happen with a 40-year-old app. It's not going to happen in 40 minutes either, and the spend is not going to be a 70% savings, and oh, by the way, it won't run. So let's have a real candid conversation about what this means. But you really do have to engage the mission. And you know what? They want to be engaged. They may not be the most technically savvy people, but they're smart. They can understand what it means. They can understand cost savings, how big they are or not. They definitely understand time to mission, time to market. If they need a change, so give you an example, Ebola became a real issue a time ago. We had literally hours to change some of our systems to alert if somebody had a number of factors that might indicate they had a possibility of having Ebola. We didn't want our officers and agents shaking hands with people and talking with them without its safety if there was a probability that that person had Ebola. We were able, because we have fairly open systems in a lot of our newer apps, we were able to make those changes within 48 hours nationwide and have the systems updated so that the rules-based engines were now accounting for various factors that would indicate a potential threat of Ebola. We wouldn't have been able to do that with our systems a decade ago. Wouldn't have happened. It would have taken a monolithic effort to get those things changed. So that's the power of these kind of moving to modern technologies, modern architectures. I think that is the power of cloud when we get all our capabilities there. But I will be honest and tell you that our first efforts in large-scale cloud for our large law enforcement systems, which the system can contain dozens of different apps that all work together to provide a bunch of functions, is going to a private cloud. So we do have our on-prem in both our DHS data centers, our own private clouds, and we are looking at full-scale implementation there first. Do I think that'll go hybrid next? Yes. Do I think eventually it'll go public? Yes. But is that going to be today? No. It's going to be an evolution.
I was going to say, it seems like most of government is hybrid,
yeah,
all the way at some point, because you've seen good examples. I guess you just mentioned yours, and then there's been other examples like the CIA's big deal a couple of years ago where they went to a big private cloud. And you've seen some good instances of public cloud computing too. The SEC and FDA have both had pretty cool use cases. If you don't know about them, check them out. They're pretty fascinating with all public infrastructure as a service, and mostly for their big data efforts. But hybrid, it seems to be the most standard because you're going to have sensitive information you don't want getting out, right? So, anybody want to take that last bit before we open it to Q&A quick?
Well, once again, it's the definition of cloud, right? And there's no question. I mean, we have a unique case of the FCC. Not that I'm complaining, but with 700 lawyers, 300 economists, 200 statisticians, 200 engineers, and as we hear, the rest of you don't really count, so it doesn't really matter that much. They have missions that are very different, and with incentive auctions, we raised in the last auction $44.5 billion for the Treasury. The mission is, everybody's different, right? I mean, I've never heard that before, but FCC is very different from that standpoint, that running auctions is a very strange thing, and understanding frequencies and collapsing frequencies and allocating frequencies. So it really takes a different kind of person that understands what that is, and so different that actually we didn't let the contract for the incentive auction piece. But the problem is that we maintain all of the infrastructure. So we have to convince the vendor running the auction and the vendors providing the infrastructure services to work together. So it's a hybrid approach that has very little to do with cloud. I mean, it's just, we have the infrastructure that validates who you are, that checks that you're not a bad guy and everything else, but the auctions actually run in a separate environment that has nothing to do with FCC. So I always think there's going to be a component that you have to have internal. I think the reality is that the amount that you need internal is very low, and I always just keep remembering, I mean, the hardest thing for me personally to hack is a very old COBOL system, not something that's new. So, I mean, some of it is just a pain in the neck, so you're just not going to bother doing it. Some of it, like that agency that won't be named, they blamed it all on old infrastructure when actually it just had very little to do with that. But it's the movement and how it's done and how it's encapsulated. That's what matters. Understand what you have, put as much around it as you can, and jam it somewhere really quickly. But I think getting the mission to stop saying this is what we want. I mean, David put in an entrepreneur structure, so we meet with our 18 bureaus and offices regularly, but they all have their lawyers and economists. I mean, they know exactly what they want, and most of it resides, unfortunately, on their desktop. So we went to VDI, and we're trying to pull everything away from the user, but everything goes in cycles. And convincing them that they can access their data anywhere, they're saying, yeah, I just want it right here. I mean, it's the anywhere thing is not good for them. And so it's always going to be a challenge, and I do believe hybrid, yeah, I mean, you're always going to have some kit in the building, hopefully very, very little. But certainly email, as you said, I mean, really to do email inside the building is bizarre. But with the proliferation of SharePoint apps and Access and all that stuff on desktops, I mean, you just have to get rid of it.
Yeah, so there's been an interesting shift in the conversation. When cloud first came out, 6 years ago, whatever, we're going to save a lot of money, right? And if you've seen Tony Scott speak recently, it's not about saving money, right? Yeah. And that's evaporated. It's about speed, it's about agility, and ironically, it's about security. I mean, one of the main obstacles to cloud at the beginning was, oh, it's not going to be secure, but now, to go to a commercial cloud provider in many ways is more secure than OPM or whatever, right? So the whole conversation has turned around.
Someone finally said it, the Lord Voldemort of federal agencies now. Agency who shall not be named.
Yeah.
So, it's, and I like to say, and, I don't know what I'm talking about, right? I'm just Stan Kaczmarczyk, right? But, this is the way the IT services industry has moved to, right? This is a new business model, and either the federal government is going to play with it or not.
Right.
And it's not about the cost savings at this point. It would be great if we could save a lot of money doing it, but that's not the main objective anymore, as far as I can see.
I would be a terrible moderator if I didn't get a few audience questions, even though we're getting a little bit low on time. So does anybody have any good questions that we could rapid fire? Gentleman in the back, there's a mic right behind you.
Hi. During my conversations with some people that are not in IT, there is this question related to data privacy and security. They say, well, how come FBI is not going after the hackers? Given what happened at OPM and Target, recently Ashley Madison. So my question to you is there a centralized, coordinated effort to enhance security and increase data privacy? And also, what do you think Congress can and should do in terms of legislation to create disincentives for hackers? And I would like to know your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Sorry.
What a great question.
I've worked on 38 pieces of legislation on cyber, so it just kind of hits a funny chord with me as to what Congress can do. But
can they do anything, really?
Yeah, the carrot stick nonsense. I mean, you can't. I think it seems kind of ludicrous to companies like Target that they get fined for losing PII when OPM just bounces along and turns over much more delicate information. Oh, I said that word. For 20 million people. So, I mean, you have to eat your own dog food. When you get your own house in order, that's fine. And when you say who's got a coordinated effort, I would say who doesn't, right? I mean, I was in the information sharing environment in the intelligence community, and we couldn't integrate 5 integration centers that belong to the government. I mean, it's like everyone's doing it. DHS just asked for weapon-carrying law enforcement authority in NPPD so they can go after cyber criminals. I mean, I'm sitting there and go, what? Really? People are going after the bad guys. You just don't hear about it unless the FBI does it because they're all about publicity. But if the other people that do it, like Secret Service and others, they don't publicize what they do. But people are going after them. They're not leaving them alone by any stretch of the imagination, except those people that shall not be named, which we only insinuate.
All right. There's one other question really quick. It's got to be like 30 seconds. Ma'am, in the middle.
Hi, the panelists talked about the plethora of cloud services in different agencies and also about the hybrid model, which is largely private and public. can any of you speak to what is really the reality that agencies are using half a dozen different cloud services, and how do you get your arms around that and manage it?
I can probably talk to that a little bit. Around the hybrid piece of it, we talked about hybrid earlier. It's about capability, about flexibility, and meeting what the mission needs are. So in architecting a couple of the solutions that I've been working with the program offices on enterprise solutions, yeah, it's definitely a hybrid model because cloud providers are not one size fits all. And that leads to what you said, a plethora of cloud service providers. I don't know that we'll ever standardize on one or two, but we do have at least a half a dozen different cloud providers that we're using. And really, I'm looking at capabilities, flexibility. You guys made the point about being able to move across cloud providers, flexibility. I need some of that. So the hybrid solutions, not only in the public space, but also connecting back to maybe some of the legacy systems that are within the data centers that we have. I think a hybrid is going to be the way to go, but you got to have that capability because it's not one cloud, one CSP fits all. There's just a ton of, between open source and software as a service solutions, who's sitting on top of who, and all the capability. There's a lot of capability out there, and that's what's driving the hybrid solutions.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, because I agree with Maria 100%. I think as the government, we owe it to taxpayers to share the wealth, and that means not spend all our money with one particular vendor, but spread it around a bit. So I think using multiple cloud vendors is the right thing to do for just the economy, and it's the right thing to do. The one caution I'd say is if you're going to do that, which I think is the thing you should do, make sure that you know your apps that you're moving to those various different clouds, because one thing you do not want to do is move one app to cloud vendor A and then another app to cloud vendor B who happen to be 1,000 miles apart, and then find out that those two applications have sub-second response time for requests from each other. You will have a problem. So you have to be smart, and I would encourage you as IT people, know your apps intimately. Know what they depend on, know what depends on them, know what those response time criticalities are, and then make appropriate decisions and say, well, we're going to bundle this group and move it here because it all relies on each other.
Yeah, you got to know where the users are.
Exactly, and know what the user response time is. So great, the app is functioning great, the users can't get to it. That's not a good solution.
Good deal. That wraps it up. Give our panelists a round of
Good meeting you.